Segment 4, where do atheists get their morality? On this program, in 2007, an exchange. Peter Robinson saying to the guest, quoting myself here, if Christopher Hitchens does not believe in God, then where does he get his sense of right and wrong? To which Christopher replied, I think it's degrading to state that absent a celestial dictatorship, we wouldn't know right from wrong. I think our knowledge of right and wrong is innate in us. We know we can't get along if we permit perjury, theft, murder, rape. All societies, at all times, have forbidden such behavior. How does David Berlinski respond?
I'm not sure. I mean, I've heard Christopher Hitchens say the same thing. I'm not sure that so far as these particular asseverations go, there is any real point of dispute. I mean, I think it's true that we know right from wrong. At least most people do most of the time. That's hardly the question, is it? Knowledge of right and wrong doesn't take us very far. Why should we be right when we could as easily be wrong?
Well, what do you make of this, that Christopher's answer there redefines the common understanding of right and wrong? What he's really saying is useful and not useful, socially useful and not socially useful.
Look at the history of the 20th century and try to account for the history of the 20th century in terms of agreeable usefulness. It is an intellectual category of splendid irrelevance. Splendid irrelevance. I mean, Nazi executioners swabbing out the death cells from their loads of blood, or communist czars sending people, communist tyrants sending people to Siberia, to the Arctic death camps. They had no use for usefulness. They had nothing constraining their behavior in terms of the traditional apparatus of a celestial dictatorship. I think that word is fine, although there is some opprobrium attached to it. But that's exactly what human beings have always said. We need someone cracking the whip over us.
Right. So I take your discussion of morality and the 20th century and the devil's delusion to be another form of the argument that you make with the anthropic principle and the Big Bang. Mm-hmm. That is to say, religious people would say there is an objective right and wrong, there is a law of God. And if you don't obey it, terrible consequences will follow. And you make the point that terrible consequences did follow.
Yes.
Right. So, again, that's not a proof for the existence of God, but it sure is suggestive. That's what you're saying.
We could put it in the fashion of Christopher Hitchens. It's not a proof for the existence of God. It's certainly a suggestion about his usefulness.
Okay. So,
all the laws of heaven and earth, Dr. Johnson remarked, are unable to prevent man from his crimes. Surely relaxing the laws of heaven and earth shall not dispose man to better behavior. That seems to me self-evident.
All right. Now, David, it's impossible to discuss the horrors of the 20th century without mentioning the Holocaust. And you have a very moving dedication here in The Devil's Delusion to your mother's father, your grandfather. You write the dedication in German, and it concludes in Auschwitz verschollen, missing in Auschwitz.
But much more to the point, disappeared.
Disappeared.
In Auschwitz.
Disappeared in Auschwitz, better translation. So how do you handle the datum of the Holocaust? In some ways, it's an utterly elementary question. You may find it as a question uninteresting, but it's not easy to answer. If there were a God, how could such a thing happen?
It's a terribly difficult question. But look, if we take the period from 1939 to 1945, look at 1945. The Jewish people yet live. Hitler's target. The Third Reich, that lies smashed to smithereens under the tank treads of Russian tanks, or blown to bits by American and British airplanes. And everyone who survived the Third Reich must survive, drowned in mourning or consumed with grief. That doesn't strike me as a whole lot less than a biblical adjudication of those war years. Not pleasant, but no one reading the Old Testament comes away convinced that the God of wrath is essentially a Rotarian. He is a God of wrath. If he chose to kill 9 million people to make a point and then destroy their persecutors, Remember Lincoln's second inaugural address, the conclusion he reaches. We must still say, as was said long ago, righteous and just are the decisions of the Lord. He was talking about a terrible war, too.
In The Devil's Delusion, David, you construct a kind of syllogistic progression to show that this is another way you show that religious questions can be perfectly reasonable. Let me quote it to you. If the universe is contingent, there is no saying whether it existed forever. Maybe, maybe not.
Maybe not.
That's point one. Point two, if anything might not exist, then it is reasonable to ask why it does exist. Point two. And point three, well, why does it exist? I mean, really?
Yeah.
How does David Berlinski answer the question?
I don't think there is an answer in terms of the traditional body of knowledge we associate with physics. I don't think physics is now in a position to answer that question, and my suspicion is it will never be in a position to answer that question. But it is a very good question, and it is a question that, while it cannot be answered from the physical tradition, can certainly be asked from the physical tradition. And that's something very interesting, the existence of a class of questions that can be asked within a physical theory, but not answered within a physical theory. And I think when you look at those kinds of questions, well, why does the universe exist? What are the causal conditions that make a universe possible? What are the necessary and sufficient conditions for bringing our universe into existence? Then you have the beginning of a sense of intellectual humility.
You're pretty sure that Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and even my friend Christopher Hitchens can't answer those questions.
Yeah.
All right.